nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OAS y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us. enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
Está en mute, presidente, no se le escucha.
Chair, you are on mute. We cannot hear you. Ambassador Mendez, can we verify quorum? Good morning. We have now completed our technical sound check. We have the following delegations with us: Argentina, Bahamas, Belize, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominica, Ecuador, El Salvador, the United States, Grenada, Guatemala, Guyana, Haiti, Mexico, Nicaragua, Paraguay, Peru, Dominican Republic, Suriname, and Uruguay. We have quorum, sir. Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary General. At this point, I'm going to submit the draft order of business to your consideration for approval. This is document CPOD 2342/21. As I see no objection, it is adopted. Let us begin our meeting. Good morning, distinguished representatives, permanent representatives, delegates, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, staff of the General Secretariat. We have verified quorum and brought this special meeting to order. In keeping with Section 13 of Resolution 2941 of the General Assembly, we are now going to hear the presentations of the candidates to occupy the 4 vacancy for judges at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights for the 2022-2027 period, to be filled at the election that will take place at the upcoming General Assembly. Since we have adopted the draft order of business, I would like to warmly welcome our candidates, and I would like to thank them for being here at this meeting, and I wish all of them the best of luck. In keeping with informative documents, CP Inf 9079/21, and the methodology approved by this Permanent Council on August 25 last, the procedure we will follow is the following. First, we will hear the presentations of the candidates in the order defined by the date on which their candidacy was presented. The time assigned for each presentation is 10 minutes. I would ask the candidates to please be strict with time. Thereafter, I will open up the floor for questions and comments by delegations of the member states. Delegations will have up to 5 minutes to make comments or ask questions. I invite delegations, to the extent possible, to make general questions and comments and to not direct any questions or comments to a specific candidate. Finally, I will offer the floor to the candidates in the same order in which they made their presentations to be able to respond to questions and comments. In this case, candidates will have 7 minutes at the most. The chair will be very strict with the use of time. In keeping with the foregoing, we now will hear the presentations by the candidates for the Inter-American Court of Human Rights for the 2022-2027 period. I would recall for delegations that the biographies of each one of the candidates were distributed together with the presentation of their candidacies, and they are on today's order of business. There are links to them on our order of business. And I would also like to greet those who are watching us from different member states. Having stated this, I would like to welcome and offer the floor for 10 minutes to the candidate Rodrigo Bittencourt Mudrovich of Brazil. Mr. Bittencourt Mudrovich, you have the floor.
Chair of the Permanent Council, Assistant Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, and permanent representatives of civil society who are attending this meeting, candidates. I am a candidate to the position of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. I thank you for the opportunity to share with you before this Permanent Council with regard to my candidacy to the court. And over the last 4 decades, the court has been consolidated as one of the most important pillars of defense of democracy and of fundamental rights and guarantees in the Americas, acting with independence and sensitivity to the most vulnerable segments of the population. This, no question, is very important for my candidacy. For human rights to have always been present in my professional career in this period, and it's very clear to me there's importance of the growing development of human rights and the core role that it plays in defense of the poor on our hemisphere. Thus, I would be honored to be eventually becoming a member of the court. The first part of my presentation, I'd like to explain to you, ladies and gentlemen, what are the contributions that I have to offer with regard to the challenges faced by the Inter-American Court and how to overcome them. I understand that there's 3 planks. The first one is to bring the court to the legal reality of each of the states. The Inter-American Court plays an important role in the progressive development of human rights. And this is fundamental with regard to protecting human from weaknesses, migrants, and seeking gender parity. And despite this, the court is very distant from reality. There's a lot of work to be able to do so that the court is more present and more relevant in the lives of the countries of the Inter-American Court, particularly the Caribbean. There's important activity with regard to visits that can be made and sessions outside of headquarters that should be held, and agreements with local authorities that should be entered into, and this will help to raise the awareness of the Inter-American system and the role of the court. The first plank includes greater engagement between the court and states to come up with alternatives and compromises to be able to help the victims and always observe the specific particularities of each place. In our hemisphere, there's a lot of diversity of cultures and legal systems and political organizations. And so, and particularly in island nations, we have, and other types. And so each one has their own issues in affirming and asserting human rights. And this plurality should be embraced by the court as a way of paving the way towards cooperation and full respect for human rights. The second plank is the need to work for disseminating the legal precedents of the court. This is essential for observance and respect by national authorities and all judicial bodies in each country. This includes strengthening enforcement of the convention and laws and decisions of the judiciary in each country, and in accordance with the international human rights treaties. However, the role of the court should be to protect individuals and groups vis-a-vis vulnerabilities, and it should be a welcoming place. The third plank has to do with the internal operations of the court. And I understand that the court should and can be strengthened, and there should be no concerns about the quantity and capacity of handling all of the applications that have to be heard by the Inter-American Human Rights Protection System. Thus, to conclude, there has to be greater efficiency in analysis of the cases, and this is fundamental to enhance dialogue between the court and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. These are 3 planks that I would like to deal with, and this requires sensitivity and a lot of institutional responsibility by those who are elected as members of the court. In the second part of my presentation, I'd like to explain to you all how my career is in line with these planks I just explained. I'm going to divide my career in 3. directly acting as a defender of human rights and all fronts. First of all, as an attorney, I have advocated for human rights before the federal court, which is the highest court in Brazil, and it has a direct impact on a high number of Brazilians. The Office of the Attorney General, Special Office for Human Rights, I've worked for this, and in my career I have dealt with issues intimately linked to judicial guarantees, freedom of expression, social rights, the rights of migrants, as well as other essential rights for full dignity of the human person. Secondly, in my academic career, human rights was always a constant, and all research and courses I've taken have been focused on this. And thirdly, I've had close contact with human rights at this stage, the final stage of my career, in different bodies. I've been members of public interest, and the technical side I've been involved in as well. I've always collaborated with professionalism and in national debates. For example, I am the Secretary General of the Commission of Jurists. Currently, I believe that the support and recognition that I've received from these 3 points of view, it helps make me a fine candidate. And I have support as well of the executive from the legislative and private and public attorneys and prosecutors, state judges, labor judges, as well as other organizations of civil society and NGOs. And this all enables me to have a candidacy, to have a lot of support throughout my country. I understand, lastly, that in the context of the pandemic, it's this choice of the members of the court is very important, and to stand up for the most vulnerable. The court will be called upon over the next years to be particularly sensitive and have the capacity to deal with these, aware of this, and the other challenges faced by the inter-American human rights system, and the different tasks that the court's judges have to perform. I've been a tirelessly defender of democracy and human rights with respect for the states and with technical and impartial and independent actions that I've taken. This makes me, ladies and gentlemen, I am available to answer any questions you have, and thank you once again for your attention, not now, but over the course of my entire campaign. Thank you very much.
Muy agradecido.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bittencourt Mudrovich, for your presentation. I welcome and offer the floor for 10 minutes to the candidate Miriam Josefina Peña Candida from Paraguay. You have the floor. Thank you. Good morning. Chair of the Permanent Council of the Organization of American States, permanent representatives and alternate representatives, colleagues, I would like to thank the Permanent Council of the OAS for the opportunity offered us at this meeting to share our vision of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, our initiatives, and if provided the position of judge at this important court in the Americas. This dialogue shows transparency at the Organization of American States. The laudable work of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights to promote and defend the rights of the inhabitants of the Americas is absolutely necessary. And so becoming a judge at that court would be a great honor. Beyond my long experience as a judge in my country for almost 40 years. I have always been doing work in other sectors, for example, like with children, and this shows my natural inclination to protect citizens' fundamental rights, especially those who are most vulnerable. My vision of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the juridical capital of the decisions of the court, is invaluable, as well as the judicial doctrine they have developed with regard to human rights. These then flow down into our legal systems, which have led to legal reforms and different policies. In Paraguay, the Inter-American system collaborated in elevating human rights standards and also to protect and elevate the rights of indigenous peoples, reparations of victims of the dictatorships, the rights of women and children, and protection of freedom of expression. At the same time, the reparations established in judgments have helped to improve conditions in prisons, to stop excesses by police, to stop pretrial detention, and to protect vulnerable people. The direct protection of economic, social, and cultural rights was also a reference point in gradual application of human rights. This applied to everyone without exception in the spirit that inspired the court based on the American Convention on Human Rights. The Inter-American System for Protection of Human Rights has shown the effective implementation of decisions of the court. Without this, the court should not exist, because if there is no effective implementation of their sentences, then human rights are not protected. There's also the job of the court to exercise conventional control. This means that they also must supervise compliance with judgments that they issue. And this shows that they are an effective court. Although we need to improve this point, because we need to have compliance with judgments. We do see many significant successes throughout the years. We need to face many challenges in the future. For example, member states of the OAS need to ratify the convention and need to accept the court's competence. We need a more effective mechanism to supervise judgments. We need to give the court its own economic resources, and also we need to have a development of locus standi. Now, I want to strengthen follow-up on judgments to reduce backlog of courts. Justice that is tardy is not justice, because that means there is re-victimization and also can lead to violations or additional violations of human rights. I want to proactively incorporate those countries into the court who are not there now, and also to make protection stronger for vulnerable people. Strengthen the important progress made in jurisprudence, especially with regard to economic, social, cultural, environmental rights. Promote the development of the system in and of itself, giving people direct access to the court. Improve material and structural resources provided to the court. My initiatives are to contribute to the development of the court and to promote and defend fundamental rights of citizens with a focus on vulnerable people. Take concrete actions to ensure transparency and access to information which are fundamental in protection of rights, to have specific actions taken also to protect procedural rights. Finally, for me, it would be a great honor to be a judge of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and I would like to pledge my commitment to the ongoing development of the Inter-American human rights system. The court would have my experience and my know-how to be able to protect the Inter-American human rights system and its standards. Today, I would like to submit to your consideration my candidacy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Peña. Now, it is a pleasure to offer the floor to Dr. Cesar Landa Arroyo of Peru. You have the floor, sir. Dr. Landa, you have the floor. Please turn on your camera. Chair of the Permanent Council, ladies and gentlemen, representatives, permanent and alternate representatives, Assistant Secretary General, candidates, good morning. My first words are to thank you for the invitation, for allowing me to make this presentation so you can understand my initiatives and vision if I were to be elected as a judge to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. As the formal President of the Constitutional Court of Peru and my academic experience, I have been a teacher and researcher for 35 years. This with regard to procedural law, human rights law, and constitutional law. I want to talk about my vision of the court. The court is the highest court in the Inter-American human rights system, and it is the court that must protect democracy and human rights in the region. There are no rights without democracy. There's no democracy without human rights. And with this understanding, I believe that the court complies with a leadership role at our system that has different levels, this based on subsidiary principles, which not have always been complied with, such as in Peru. Peru actually withdrew from recognition of the competence of the court, but came back in 2001. And the court is a guiding light that has developed its jurisprudence and has given consultative opinions in order to protect the human rights of victims, this with regard to old and new challenges. This has an impact on the rights of everyone in the region, above all in the cases of the most vulnerable populations. To this end, ambassadors, in the framework of national and international human rights, the court has matured in its basis of interpreting human rights based on, for example, different specifics, gender, as well as in the matter of protection of vulnerable groups in the framework of the Inter-American system and national laws based on the American Convention. Notwithstanding the importance of the court's protection of human rights in the region, we are facing great difficulties because of the pandemic, lack of equitable access to vaccine, climate change, challenges of digital divide, This affects millions of people and their families, leaving them in precarious and insecure conditions. And this can lead to a loss of life. But the protection to the physical integrity, free transit, freedom of expression, right to health, right to work are among other rights that are the basis of human dignity. And these are fundamental rights for everyone in a democratic society, because this is the way to protect people from threats to their security and a way to promote well-being based on justice. So it is important to talk about my initiatives and my proposals now. To comply with observance of human rights law and to protect human rights in a health crisis, when there are natural disasters or challenges to our society by digitalization, we need to ensure basic conditions for well-being of our families and individuals, and restrictions to freedoms or liberties because of emergency need to be proportional and reasonable, especially if there are states of emergency. This shows the need of the court because of the demands in the region, this now in the 21st century. We have had a change in paradigm because we are living through an abnormal situation, which is an exception. But nowadays, we have many crises globally and locally. And the court, the Inter-American Human Rights Court, needs to be prepared to be able to address these challenges. And the state of emergencies, when they exist, can actually threaten rights, because it means that they can suspend certain rights, and they can do so based on the convention. However, we need to protect human rights of all victims if there are victims in the crisis. We have climate crisis, we have environmental crisis, we have health crisis. The original conception of human rights were based on protection by the states. If there have been violations of human rights, like right to life and right to physical integrity, well, because of the recent developments in human rights, we see that human rights needs proactive action by the state so that we can have assertion of these rights, also reparations if there are violations of rights. So we need a court that makes a dynamic interpretation of Article 27 of the court, which has to do with the gradual and positive application of human rights. And this includes the ESCE rights. And this has to do with, again, economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights, because these are comprehensive rights, human rights. Now, this progressive development and application is important. And we need to have national policies that ensure effective enjoyment of these rights through specific actions. These are also linked to subsidiarity and complementary competence of the court. We need to have the compliance with the judgments of the court by the states. But these principles with regard to ESCE rights should not be vertical. Rather, it should be based on dialogue through judgments of national courts and of the Inter-American Court, which ensures human rights in the framework of national legislation and commitments of the states to the Inter-American human rights system. There are many debates about this question, and this has allowed, for example, the European Court of Human Rights to develop its jurisprudence. This is especially true, or was true, after the fall of the Berlin Wall in the eastern states of the European Union. Nevertheless, in our inter-American region, we have a plural culture, and our roots are in legislation and laws that we find in France and Spain and other countries, and those roots are rich and diverse. The Inter-American Court has built an Inter-American juice, and this has become a foundation for our laws. Finally, based on my experience, my academic and judicial experience, if I were given a judgeship at the court, I will work arduously to protect all our citizens. For example, to develop jurisprudence, to issue judgments, and issue consultative opinions that take into account all legal systems and based on conventional control. These would be based on complementarity and subsidiary that would allow for access to the court by all. We would also issue in an effective way consultative opinions in keeping with deadlines that are established, also to make more effective compliance with judgments, and improvement of efficiency of the court, this with regard to non-repetition, reparation, also to have closer links to national governments as well as links to other international courts in order to promote human rights, and finally strengthen the effectiveness in transparency of resources, this based on different indicators. Thank you very much. I thank you very much for your intervention. I would now give the floor to Nancy Hernandez Lopez from Costa Rica. You have the floor.
Fernando, is she disconnected? But she has to activate her. She's on the screen. She has to activate her, enable her microphone. Thank you, Madam Hernandez. Thank you, Chairman. Cordial greeting to the permanent and alternate representatives, the Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General, and of course, as well as to the candidates and the audience that has joined us this morning. I've accepted the nomination of the distinguished position of judge on the Inter-American Court of Human Rights following a 34-year-long career devoted to the defense and promotion of human rights, where I underscore my judicial experience of 30 years in constitutional law, of which over the last 8 years I've served as a judge on the Constitutional Court, the highest court of my country, after a public competition, and was elected by a majority by the parliament for this. This experience allows me to understand the responsibility and the weight of administering justice at the highest level, as well as the consequences of issuing binding judgments on the hottest topics that are high tension at this time, as I've always done with absolute independence. No question that this choice to renew the members of the Inter-American Court will be carried out, is taking place during the most complex juncture faced by the region in 40 years, in a setting of erosion, of undermining of democracy worldwide, in the midst of the pandemic, climate change, which aggravates the situation of the region. Basically, the well-being of 500 million people depends depends on what we can build together as government, civil society, and judges. Of course, the main task of is undeniable that the court plays a transformative role in legal culture and serves as a catalyst to open up democracy and stability and create stability. The role of the court will be crucial to aid in the efforts of the states to reach standards of respect for human dignity, justice, and equity, without which it's difficult for democracies to maintain their legitimacy as an option to satisfy the basic needs of inhabitants. My commitment to you all is to strengthen everything, all the good things that the Inter-American Court has done over these 4 decades in its role as complementing the states, protecting always its subsidiary nature, and striking the middle road and balance that must exist between protection of human rights as the purpose of the Inter-American system, judicial, legal certainty, and procedural equity. For reasons of time, I'm going to talk about 4 major planks of action that seem to me should be addressed by in the court. First, strengthening legitimacy and independence, because there cannot be universality of the system or solidness if there's no trust in the objectiveness of justice. I begin by saying that this crisis scenario of the rule of law is a challenge at all levels, and especially in the case of the court, it depends on the good faith in compliance with the judgments and strengthening inter-American dialogue. And hand in hand with this, no question, with this issue is the issue of the independence and impartiality of judges and with regard to judicial ethics and creation of modern standards to regulate conflicts of interest for all the staff of the court. As has been said, quality and trust in justice cannot be greater than the technical and moral quality of the judges and operators. The conduct of judges is not and cannot be that of a politician or a free citizen. It's subject to strict rules that due to the image and integrity of the impartiality of judges. And not only should they be independent, but they must be a reasonable observer. I express to you that there must be transparency as well as developing an ethical judicial policy as a system that doesn't have full-time judges. And with regard to incompatibilities, and a discussion on the use of social networks, of personnel, and in general, there has to be transparency and regulation of the incompatible relationships in general of the members of the court. A judiciary that has integrity is the base of legitimacy and trust of all justice systems, and this is a central issue of mine, convinced that there cannot be compliance or understanding. My second objective is focused on strengthening dialogue with the states, victims, and civil society to have a justice that's closer to the people. We have to recognize that there have been efforts made in this regard, but these efforts should be stepped up to achieve greater better outreach and conducting seminars in the territories of the states so that dialogue can enable an understanding of the different contexts of each country and the differences between the different legal systems of the region, particularly the common law countries. My commitment is a more present justice, less at desktop and more open door. Likewise, with regard to compliance with judgments, I am interested in generating discussions on the precision or clarity of the technically speaking of the basis of judgments. We had an experience in a contentious case of the Inter-American Court, which, generally speaking, in the operational part, created confusion among judges and made it necessary for the court to issue a second judgment to explain. And this wears everyone down, and nobody knew exactly what was originally meant. And so therefore I think there must be technical rigor in judgments, and we should go to extremes for there to be legal certainty by all parties. And my third objective is to achieve greater transparency and efficiency of the court through strengthening the use of technologies, especially with regard to communication and promotion of human rights. And lastly, to migrate towards digital electronic case files in real time for all documents. Of course, my vision is strengthening the use of technological tools that to make it compatible with a justice that has a human face, so that the personal contact with the judges and parties, and particularly with the victims, cannot be substituted once we overcome this pandemic. The goal then is to achieve a inter-American justice that's closer, more transparent and modern without losing a human face. As the fourth objective, it seems to me the central element to improve the performance of the court is the need for the judges be permanent, full-time, and they should have greater representative of all geographic areas that are make up the Organization of American States. This is a measure that not only ensures greater efficiency of the court, but also gives greater legitimacy to the system and strengthens its role as a catalyst for inter-American dialogue throughout the region. Lastly, as we see in our multicultural region with huge challenges with regard to equality, it's time for the Inter-American Court to have greater consistency between what it preaches and what its reality reflects. I respectfully urge you to strengthen the system by ensuring integration with greater parity. And to sum up, I place before the Inter-American system judicial experience as a judge, and also office work at a key time to continue ensuring the solidity and earnestness of the Inter-American justice system. To you, I take on the commitment to justice for it to be complementary and subsidiary to the efforts made by the states in this area to contribute to the development of a common legal system and to help strengthen the values of democracy and liberty. When we fail and lose our way, it should be independent and impartial with high ethical standards closer to the present. And it must be representative of the multicultural diversity of our region, and at the same time more transparent and modern, but always conserving its human face. To you, permanent council members, I give you my commitment for this vision of justice. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Hernandez Lopez, for your remarks. Next, I'm pleased to give the floor for 10 minutes maximum to candidate Veronica Gomez of the Republic of Argentina. Go right ahead, madam. Thank you very much, Madam. Chairman. I welcome to the ambassadors and permanent representatives and alternate representatives, Secretary General of the organization, and other candidates who I am honored to be considered in this process with. I'm also like to recognize the member states of the organization for this opportunity. Shared opportunity to listen to the candidates in this high impact choice for the future of the Inter-American Court, and therefore for the interpretation of human rights in our region. I cannot help but introduce myself as part of the generation of jurists that began their university schooling in the middle of the 80s. It was key. The return to democracy was taking place, and the processes of memory, justice, and reparation in Argentina and other states of the region. What happened in those years, this consolidated the rule of law and the relationship between democracy and human rights. And most historic and cultural dimension with values nationally and with regard to multilateralism. And in this process, the OAS and the human rights bodies played a fundamental role over the course of 3 decades, almost 3 decades, at different points, historic points in time, protection of rights through the different international instruments and the mechanisms have been the focus of my university training and my career in public, national, and international profession and in my academic endeavors. It's been consistent over the course of time in these different areas. It's made me very close to international human rights law. This has been fueled by all a whole lot of experience, including dealing with the Inter-American I've worked with the state, the perspective of the state, the perspective of academia, the people, and also the perspective of our organization, our OAS, Organization of American States. I've worked from all these perspectives. My career is dedicated to coming together. Over the last decade, I've not only promoted human rights education and inter-American case law throughout the world, but I've also worked specifically in designing and promoting exchanges of best practices in the area of human rights in our region. To sum up, the learning and experiences and all the expertise I've acquired over these years in the area of international human rights law defines my profile as a candidate. What has been the motivation for my nomination? Some analysts, contemporary analysts, have questioned to what extent international law and its institution are up to the task of structural inequality and dealing with poverty and other more human rights related issues. The voices that are against this and multilateral supervision have become stronger. In this context, it's vital and to strengthen the capacity and values of the inter-American system, and to engage in dialogue with the states and civil society. The Inter-American Court plays a fundamental role in this dialogue because it is the highest expression of standards and human rights for Latin America and the Caribbean and the rest of the hemisphere. And so the court requires judges that have parity of representation with a commitment vis-a-vis the multilateralism oversight and the rights perspective, judges that contribute to promote regional standards in the field of human rights. But what are the contributions that I expect to make to the Inter-American Court should I be chosen at the upcoming General Assembly? As the basic premise, to contribute to the development of the legal precedents of the court in the contentious jurisdiction and advisory opinions with regard to the interpretation of the scope of civil and political rights as well as economic, social, cultural rights. This task requires dealing with a lot of issues such as structural inequality that exists throughout our region, and therefore the next period will be key. So we have an unavoidable agenda with regard to the protection of the environment and its impact on the survival and quality of life of the people and the communities, not only globally, but especially in our region. So therefore, protection of the environment, economic, social, and cultural rights, it's the impact of new technologies and also protection of children must be taken into account holistically in interpretation of international human rights law. As a second premise, I will seek to contribute to the legitimacy of the court. The authority of international courts, particularly human rights courts, the authority depends on their legitimacy vis-a-vis the victims and civil society, national human rights agencies, and also the states who are under the jurisdiction thereof. This contribution requires special attention to the transparency in procedures, and weighing evidence, and in situ hearings of the court, clarity, swiftness, and timeliness of judgments, of oversight of compliance and communication in general. These contributions should go hand in hand with genuine contributions to strengthen institutional strengthening of the court, from pronouncements on standards in Latin America and in the English-speaking Caribbean, Haiti, and Suriname, to continuing to support financially, receive support for its budget. To sum up, if I am chosen, I will work to strengthen the Inter-American Court as a fair and impartial body in interpreting the American Convention, which is enabled once domestic remedies are exhausted, and to consolidate legal certainty that the Inter-American Court should offer to the states and the inhabitants of our region. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Veronica Gomez, for your presentation. Next, I offer the floor to up to 10 minutes to candidate Patricia Perez Goldberg of Chile. Go right ahead, please.
Ms. Perez, please turn on your microphone and your camera. Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much. Greetings to you and representatives of member states of the OAS, and also to the other candidates here and those who are hearing us. I thank you for this opportunity. My presentation has 3 parts. First, I will talk about my experience. Then I will talk about some challenges that I believe that the Inter-American system are facing. Specifically, I'm going to speak in English during the time when I talk about the challenges to the English-speaking countries. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about what I think my contributions could be at the court. Firstly, with regard to my biography, I am from a province. I'm from Valparaiso. I have 2 daughters. And also, when I was 17, I became disabled. Now, with regard to my legal experience, I want to talk about my path. I have worked in the public sector. When I graduated from the university, I went into judicial assistance, which is provided by the state. And then when there was a reform of the procedural system, I went into public defense. And this included using a case law from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the American Convention, and other human rights bodies. Then I started to work in the Ministry of Justice as a subsecretary and then as a minister. Then I had to use international standards of human rights. This to be able to have structural changes in benefit of vulnerable groups in my country, especially those deprived of liberty. At that time, I promoted a law with regard to depriving people of their liberty, and one that was based on gender equality. I participated in different fora, which were personally and professionally enriching. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state because of past human rights violations. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state because of past human rights violations. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state because of past human rights violations. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state because of past human rights violations. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state because of past human rights violations. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state because of past human rights violations. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state because of past human rights violations. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state because of past human rights violations. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state because of past human rights violations. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state because of past human rights violations. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state because of past human rights violations. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state because of past human rights violations. I also apologized on behalf of the Chilean state And I also promoted the Sub-Secretariat of Human Rights creation. Now, with regard to my technical training, I went to the Catholic University in Valparaiso. I have a doctorate degree at the University of Paraiso. I also looked at women who are deprived of liberty. I also made a contribution to the reform of our legislation. I studied at the California Western House of Law. I have also participated in different training courses on human rights through UN, British Council, Flaxo, and others. I was an expert at different international and national bodies. I've dealt with different kinds of legal systems, and I have put my experience to use as an advisor. Now, with regard to some of the challenges facing the system, I want to say is that the main challenge is a universalization of the system. We heard from a candidate last week that this is not just the ratification of the convention, but also it's something that's broader. Now, this is an objective. We want the competence of the court to be recognized. A second challenge has to do with the inclusion of the countries of the Caribbean. And if I may, I'm going to speak in English now.
Regarding the Caribbean community, I think there is a very important need in order to incorporate the different realities, the different concerns that are particular to the Caribbean countries, and that perhaps are not fully grasped by the current jurisprudence of the court. So I can think mainly of three ways of doing this. First of all, as I said, taking these realities into account. The second way is to incorporating its doctrine, specifically the precedent. As you know, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights makes extensive use of its precedent, but I think it would be necessary to incorporate perhaps a more sophisticated understanding of the precedent into the work of the court. And third of all, I think in matters of training and staff, it would be important to take a look at a deeper view. I think the court needs judges willing to engage with different traditions, and it's important as well to provide for training programs for the members of the Caribbean community, for lawyers, practitioners, scholars, and to take a look at the staff, specifically into the Secretariat staff, in order to make sure that integration is balanced and that in that staff you have people trained in different legal traditions. En relación a un tercer desafío vinculado.
Now, with regard to universalization, I want to say that public servants need to be trained, because this means that we could avoid violations of human rights if these public servants were trained and discharged their duties based on a human rights perspective. Also, with regard to case law, the court has faced many challenges to be able to bring justice to citizens, but I think we can work on judgments that are shorter without sacrificing anything, make them more accessible, not just experts, but also for all people. And finally, with regard to challenges of universalization, I think it is important to also include perspectives of national courts. I think there are many ideas that come from these courts which could be included in the court's case law, especially when the opinions of the court are in line with precedents of the court, because this can help us make headway with regard to the development of human rights. And I say all of this notwithstanding many of the challenges that others have faced. I know that the court has had many successes in protecting vulnerable groups. Of course, we are living through a pandemic, and I'm not going to, because of time, go into that more. Finally, I want to share with you what I could contribute to the court. I think that in the different experiences that candidates have, it means that we or I could help deliberations, and that would mean better judgments. And I want to make these more accessible. And why do I point this out? Because I think this could be a contribution beyond my experience that I shared with you. I think that in my experience has allowed me to really, my experience as someone who became disabled and had to learn to walk again, that this showed me that as humans, we are all tied to each other, and together we are stronger, especially if we face challenges hand in hand. And so I've had to face many theoretical and practical challenges when designing public policies. And so this has given me an opportunity, which is very interesting, and I think I have a panoramic vision. So I think that joint work and respecting the culture of human rights is possible, but we must involve all peoples at all levels. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Patricia Perez Goldberg. I appreciate your presentation. And now I would like to give the floor to the candidate, Maitri Vidya Kuldip Singh from Suriname. Sir, you have the floor.
Good morning, Chair of the Permanent Council, Mr. Harold Forsey, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, Ambassador Nestor Mendes, ambassadors, colleague candidates, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to address this Reviews House of the OAS. I was looking forward to this moment, and I take the opportunity to thank the Permanent Council for my presentation today and the government of Suriname for my nomination. My presentation has three parts. I start by sharing with you my former and current activities in relation to human rights and my country's interest in nominating me. And finally, I will also indicate how I will contribute to the Inter-American Court if elected. My activities in relation with human rights. I practice law since 2000. I started my career as a human rights activist in a human rights NGO called Moiwana 86, where I was the head of the judicial department. I was a member of a commission to draft the Domestic Violence Act. I gave legal assistance to victims of human rights violations, both national and international, and I taught and wrote about human rights topics. After that, I worked as an attorney in a lawyer's office, and my focus was on civil rights and indigenous rights. I became a court secretary in 2004, and in the same time, I was elected to follow a 5-year training program as a judge in training. Part of my training program was in the Netherlands. In 2009, I was appointed as a judge, and I worked in the criminal and civil sector and as a judge of instruction, giving legal assistance to the Netherlands on the basis of a treaty. Human rights education is also part of permanent education for judges currently, and part of my court cases are about trafficking in persons and anti-corruption, and international drug trafficking. I worked in both the High Court of Suriname and the First Instance Court. I participated as a jury member for a moot court competition on human rights for university students. Furthermore, I was a focal point for the Caribbean Association of Judicial Officers in Suriname, and I participate in their training program under which human rights education, and I have knowledge about the system. Tomorrow, we have a seminar with the Caribbean judges from the CARICOM that is called the Strengths and the Challenges of the Judiciary in the CARICOM. I am familiar with the system of the Caribbean Court of Justice, as Suriname has accepted the original justice of the Caribbean Court. Currently, I'm also a board member of the Justice Study Center of the Americas since 2019, whose headquarters is in Chile, an organization with long-time experience in promoting human rights in Latin America. In August this year, I have the benefit to share with you. We were very pleased that in August this year, last month, it was the first time that GSCA did a pilot project on the topic of anti-corruption in my country, where the judiciary in my country participated. Those were court secretaries, judges, and public prosecutors. For further information about my career development, I refer to my CV. My country's interest in nominating me. This is the first time that Suriname applies for a position in the Inter-American Court, and we think it is important to have an equal representation of different systems, of different regions in the Inter-American Court. Since the establishment of the Inter-American Court, only Jamaica, as a CARICOM country, had a seat twice in the Inter-American Court, and I noticed that there is a need to change to a better reality to make CARICOM nationals part of the international OAS bodies. The Caribbean countries can be defined as small states, and we think it is of critical importance that small states as Suriname and the English-speaking CARICOM countries have a voice in international mechanisms and processes to increase the opportunity that our unique challenges can be brought to the table. Furthermore, it is crucial for us to participate in human rights organizations and courts to achieve access to networks where human rights are practiced and where citizens of small states can increase their knowledge on human rights topics that is often poorly available in small states. My participation as a possible judge in the Inter-American Court will strengthen and stimulate CARICOM representation in the Inter-American Court and to ensure that there is an equal representation of CARICOM nationals in the selection process of a judge in the Inter-American Court. I am familiar with different systems in the OAS through the Caribbean Association of Judicial Officers, through the Caribbean Court of Justice, and through GSCA, and I have knowledge about the strengths and the challenges of the Inter-American system. The third and the last part is my indication how I will contribute to the Inter-American Court if elected. First, I want to address the participation of women in the Inter-American Court. I think that should be increased because the history of the Inter-American Court has shown that very few women had a chance to be a judge in the Inter-American Court. Although the Inter-American Court has promoted the participation of women in institutions, gender policies have not been reflected in the Inter-American Court institutional structure. If elected, I would plead for creating policies to have more women involved as a judge in the Inter-American Court. My personal story and my career development is one of ambition, insisting equal chances, dedication, loyalty, permanent education, strong networking, and perseverance in reaching goals for the best interest of my community and my region. The second thing is compliance. The Inter-American Court in its rulings often requests that the state take specific remedial actions, and it often orders action that the state cannot handle single-handedly. So I think it has to make itself matter to local state actors beyond the foreign ministry to achieve greater implementation of its rulings, as compliance with international law increases when international institutions can penetrate the surface of the state to interact with government decision makers to shape those actors into compliant partners. The third is to give priority to vulnerable groups during this pandemic. At this moment, the pandemic affected socio-economic rights and vulnerable groups like women, children, detainees, irregular immigrants. Those vulnerable groups have been hit hard. We also face challenges in climate change and the situation of irregular migrants, in which the Inter-American Commission gave several advisory opinions and verdicts. The situation of vulnerable groups is a concern that we can only address in the spirit of brotherhood, solidarity, and unity. Multilateralism and international solidarity came under high pressure due to the COVID pandemic, and the principle of collective effort and joint responsibility have been replaced by a more individual approach, one to protect one's nation first. I'm only thinking, for example, of the equal distribution of COVID vaccines in the region. Furthermore, I plead for permanent English translation of documents and jurisprudence from the Inter-American Court so that the system is more accessible to the non-Spanish-speaking OAS countries, and the promotion of human rights education can be guaranteed and continued. Regarding case management, I think the Inter-American Court should also work closer with member states and donors to implement a better strategic planning. For example, which cases and which topics are a priority now that needs immediate attention, and how can we spend our time more effectively with case management, ensuring the credibility of the overall system without losing sight to the fact that quality has to stay intact. I also make notice of the poor funding from the regular and specific funds, making it difficult for the Inter-American system to meet its goals in a proper way. Therefore, I plead for a budget especially dedicated to the Inter-American Court in order to meet its goals, because the money they get from the regular and the specific funds are not enough. Also, the Inter-American Court can focus on the innovation of technology to save money, for example, have virtual hearings and shorten the times of the hearings without losing sight to the quality of the proceedings. Thank you very much for your attention. Muchas gracias para tu atención. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vidya Kuldeep Singh. Now we're going to move on to item 3, questions and comments from member state delegations. Thus, I invite delegations to take the floor and to make general comments or ask general questions, which should not be addressed to any specific candidate. And as agreed, please do not go over 5 minutes. I now offer the floor to those delegations who would like to request the floor. Now, we have a very distinguished figure asking for the floor. We have the Foreign Minister of Costa Rica asking for the floor. Minister, it is a pleasure to give you the floor. Thank you very much, Ambassador Forsyth, Chair. Good morning to our dear representatives and candidates to judgeships at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. I thank you for your presentations. For Costa Rica today's meeting is a moment of utmost importance for decision making, decisions that all states party to the American Convention of Human Rights must make at the 51st regular session of the General Assembly of this organization, which will take place in November. This decision is one of great importance for the Inter-American System of Human Rights. It is a decision with which we will be electing new judges to our court. But what is even more important is that this decision is a responsibility as states party, which will lead to the strengthening of the court through administration of justice that takes into account the real human face of victims. For Costa Rica, it is an honor to have a candidate who has the professional and human qualities like Judge Nancy Hernandez Lopez. She is a judge of the Constitutional Division of the Supreme Court of Justice of Costa Rica. Throughout her long profession, she has showed her integrity, her independence, her transparency, her expertise, and also her wiseness in all actions. So because of these qualities, in 2020, she was given the Achievement Award for 30 years of service in the judicial branch. This award is only given to those who have a perfect record. Together with this, there is the recognition of her work as a judge in strengthening the anti-corruption system of the judicial branch, and she was given an award on our National Day Against Corruption last December. Costa Rica hopes to have your support, which will allow our candidate to contribute her knowledge, integrity, and experience to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. I wanted to conclude, Chair, asking the candidates in the current regional context, specifically, what is the most pressing challenge you have identified and that you believe you will need to face when you become judge at the court? Thank you. Thank you, Excellency, for your participation in this special meeting of the Permanent Council. We are very grateful. I would now like to offer the floor to the permanent representative of Mexico, Luz Elena Baños. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Chair. The delegation of Mexico thanks the distinguished candidates for their presentation, and we welcome them to the Permanent Council. We also are so happy to see so many women candidates. We recognize that the Inter-American Court of Human Rights is a building block of the human rights system, and we promote the court. Many jurists from Mexico, for example, Ramirez and others, have been judges and president of the court. Also, Eduardo Ferrer is still on the court. The case law of the court enriches the laws of our region, not just with regard to human rights, and in compliance with judgments of the court and guarantees of non-repetition. This benefits all citizens of the states. Because of the richness of the judgments of the court, our judicial branch has been able to enrich its law and legislation, UNAM and other universities have included studies in human rights, and Mexico many times has been headquarters or hosted special sessions of the court. For these reasons, my delegates believe that the candidates to judgeships at the Inter-American Court must be the best jurists, the most honorable, most able, and most committed in our region. My delegation has prepared some questions with regard to the presentations made. First question: 20 countries have accepted the contentious competence of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Do you believe that this limits the effectiveness of observance of the case law issued by the court? 2, what is your opinion about the decisions taken by the court with regard to protection of vulnerable peoples, especially LGBTQ people? What is your opinion with regard to advisory opinions of the court using sources and standards from different places? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your remarks, Mexico. The permanent representative, Ambassador Hativa, has the floor. Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to greet and thank all of the candidates for their presentations, candidates to judgeships of the Inter-American Court. And these presentations have confirmed the moral and professional qualities of the candidates to judgeships at the court. And of course, we wish you all great success. We have 4 questions. 1, with regard to the contentious cases, how could the Inter-American Court improve its confirmation that domestic remedies have been exhausted? With regard to procedure, there is a work plan at the court, and this has increased the, or at the commission, there are many reports, merits reports that are sent to the court. What do you think the result is for states? Now, with regard to strengthening the credibility of the Inter-American human rights system, what is your opinion about a joint strategy with the IACHR with regard to merits reports, in order to respond effectively within the Inter-American human rights system? And I'm talking about response to victims so that they get justice. What steps could be taken to strengthen the engagement with the Inter-American Commission? Thank you. I thank the permanent representative of Ecuador. The alternate representative of Argentina, Maria Cecilia Viraga, has the floor. Thank you, Chair. First of all, we want to thank you for convening this meeting. This fosters dialogue between candidates and the states. We thank all of the candidates for their interesting presentations. Argentina reiterates its commitment to the Inter-American system of human rights because of the important role that it has played in our recent past and how this has impregnated the Argentine society with a vision of human rights. This is reflected in different initiatives of Argentina at the OAS, this with regard to economic, social, cultural rights, as well as civil and political rights, with ongoing dialogue with the bodies that are part of the Inter-American human rights system and the presentation of candidates such as Dr. Veronica Gomez. Her appointment was not arbitrary. We followed a procedure that meant meeting with civil society as well as candidates. And these are good practices for selecting candidates for international human rights bodies. Dr. Veronica Gomez was selected because of her qualities and her professional experience, and because our country believes that it is important to have women on the Inter-American Court. We celebrate that this year that the president of the court as well as the president of the commission have been women. Also, we celebrate the large number of women that we have as candidates to the court. And we hope that organization will continue to advance towards gender parity. Now, our challenge does not have to do only with gender in the context of pandemic, which has had an adverse effect on our states and societies, poverty, social inequality, equitable access to vaccines, the effects of climate change, among others, constitute current challenges that demand political will from states and coordinated action by regional bodies that protect human rights. We believe that a court which develops specific know-how of jurisprudence of our countries, such as international law, well, we need this for all of us. As we know, we cannot just limit our vision to Latin America. We must have all states in the Americas involved. We must recognize the importance of Latin American civil law and common law. So my question is for the candidates, how can you continue to strengthen the relationship between the court and the commission with the states of the organization in order to further this objective? I wish all the candidates the best of luck. And thank you very much, Chair, for this meeting and for giving me the floor. Thank you very much, Ms. Villagra. Maria Roquevert, the permanent representative of Panama, has the floor. Ambassador, you are on mute. Thank you, Chair. The delegation of Panama would like to thank the candidates for their presentations and also for the opportunity to hear their opinions on important issues for member states. In the context of the Inter-American System of Human Rights, and especially with regard to the work of the Human Rights Court that our country values. And so I am so happy to see the diverse number or the diverse candidates, and that there are so many women candidates. It is important for Panama to have a court that reflects the diversity of our peoples together with a solid technical profile. So the questions that we have prepared are the following. Given the context of the pandemic, where we have seen an increase in inequality, and we see backstepping in women's and children's rights, what role can the court play to support member states in designing inclusive public policies and to be able to protect and respect human rights in such uncertain times? Two, with regard to the gender and development agendas, what do you believe are the spaces that can help us to improve on these matters? Three, given these circumstances, what role should technology play to to have the court engage with states and with citizens, especially with regard to dissemination and training, taking into consideration that budget restrictions mean we need to be more efficient in our management, especially in the future. To conclude, Chair, Panama reiterates its commitment to all bodies of the inter-American human rights system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Roquefort. Now I give the floor to the acting representative, Raul Martinez, acting representative of Paraguay. Raul, go ahead. Mr. Chairman, my delegation expresses its gratitude for the presentations of the candidates, particularly. We are pleased to have the participation of a Paraguayan candidate who we are nominating for the first time in the history, and ever, that is, who's very committed to the inter-American system. I have two queries, very specific questions I'd like to pose to the candidates. Firstly, I'd like to ask, what are your proposals to strengthen supervision of compliance of the judgments of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights? And should the candidate, should you be elected, with regard to how to coordinate work between the court and the states? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Raul. We give the floor now to the permanent representative of Guatemala, Rita Claveria de Scioli. Go right ahead. Thank you very much. Guatemala is especially grateful to the candidates to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights for their participation in this special meeting of the Permanent Council, which has enabled us to assess the very competent presentations that shows the qualifications for applying to this position. I join into the expressions of gratitude because mainly because of the fact that there are 5 women candidates. Guatemala wishes the most success to each and every candidate and trusts that the election that will take place during the 51st General Assembly of the OAS, of which Guatemala is honored to host, that the best candidates, technically and academic and morally, will be chosen. Now, allow me to address my questions to all candidates. The first question, what is your opinion about the criticisms of the court as to its actions as a fourth instance, or acting as a court of fourth instance? How do you view the Inter-American Court of Human Rights could issue reparation measures, the compliance of which is in line with the actual possibilities of the states? And the last question I'd like to pose is, what measures do you consider could be implemented by the court to ensure security in virtual hearings with regard to experts and witnesses, to guarantee that their testimonies or expert testimony are not being influenced by anyone as they're going on? Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, very kind permanent representative of Guatemala. Now I give the floor to the acting representative of Suriname, Juanito Lon. Go right ahead.
Chair, distinguished excellencies candidates, the permanent mission of the Republic of Suriname wishes to express appreciation to the candidates for their valuable presentations and wishes to congratulate them. My government is of the view that the work of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights is extremely important because commitments of a state party to the Inter-American Convention benefits the people of this hemisphere and leads to the necessary progressive development within our states. Suriname is highly committed to support the Inter-American Court of Human Rights to maintain its role in the Western Hemisphere as a supporter for justice in its broadest context, and fully agrees with the goals and the objectives of this international distinguished court. Furthermore, we are of the view that geographical representation and diversity are very important within the Inter-American system. All countries and legal systems should be represented. Chair, it is because of the aforementioned that my government has decided to present for the first time since signing on as a state party to the Inter-American Convention the candidature of Dr. Maitre Vidya Kuldeep Singh. Judge Kuldeep Singh, who has a respected professional background and distinct personal values, will be a valuable asset to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights if elected. Our question to all the candidates is as follows. Because of the importance of the Inter-American system and the respect to human rights in the region, to all state parties of the Inter-American Convention, what is the view of all the candidates to improve that there is compliance with the judgments of the court? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Acting Representative of Suriname. I give the floor now to Ambassador Alejandro Ordóñez, Permanent Representative of Colombia. Alejandro, go ahead. Thank you, Chair. The questions of Colombia are as follows. First, how do you assess or evaluate accountability? And do you feel that it's appropriate for a jurisdictional body such as the court receive financing from NGOs or states? Second question, what is your position with regard to the principle of margin of appreciation or leeway in view of the different legal cultures and systems between states? Just to give you one example, the ones between the CARICOM countries, the common law countries. Third question, do you believe that there should be enforcement of the convention in abstractum? Those are the questions for Colombia, Chair. Very grateful, Mr. Permanent Representative of Colombia. I give the floor right now. The Permanent Representative, or Acting Permanent Representative of Brazil, Ms. Olimar Núñez. Go ahead, Olimar. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, Chair, Assistant Secretary General. I'm grateful for this meeting, special meeting of the Permanent Council, which provides an opportunity to learn about the career and proposals of the candidates to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And particularly, I thank all of the candidates for their presentations and thank you for being part of this transparent and democratic process, which provides the states a basis for their decisions and to decide on who each state considers most prepared to be a judge to sit on the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. The elections this year are of a special nature because of the unusually high number of candidates and the high number of women candidates, which we were grateful for. Chair, Brazil attaches high proportion to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. The decision of the Brazilian store to nominate a candidate it shows our engagement and our commitment to the system, as reflected also in the importance we attach to this body that through the case law and promotion of human rights in our countries pays special attention to the rights of individuals in a vulnerable situation. We find the court to have a transformational impact in contributing to the justice systems of the region. So therefore, we've had two courts, judges. Brazil has two candidates there, but that's why we want to continue in this tradition. And Dr. Rodrigo Bittencourt Mudrovic, who's a solid candidate and has an outstanding candidacy, and he can contribute to technically and in a partial way, in an ethical and committed way, and tireless way to protect human rights, learn about the realities of each country. So his career is quite outstanding. He's dealt with cases of individuals who live in vulnerable situations like women and migrants. And before the Supreme Court, he has many skills and a lot of experience in academia, and he is in charge of reforming Brazil's constitutional procedural provisions of law. And so we support fully this candidacy. All three branches of government support him, and as well as civil society. And with everything that I said at the beginning of my remarks, there's no doubt that we have highly qualified candidates for these positions. Whatever the candidates are, we take into account their profile, their proposals, and what they tend to do as judges. Thus, to conclude, I'd like to address questions to all the candidates to contribute to the debate that should be done at the General Assembly. So if you were elected, what would your highest priority be as a member of the court? Thank you very much, Chair, and to the candidates, and thank you once again for allowing us to participate in this on this occasion. Thank you very much, Aurimar. Now I give the floor to the permanent representative of Chile, Ambassador Coro. Thank you very much, Chair. We are grateful to the candidates for their proposals and presentations that they've provided for us, and we highly appreciate. We think the candidate from our country, Ms. Patricia Perez, and we've nominated her as a candidate to the court because of her career. Her career in Chile reaffirms its commitment, particularly says that it's women's time to be on the court. Chair, the defense and promotion of human rights should be of a dynamic nature because the world is dynamic. It changes day to day. Days ago, we just faced a situation that we condemned categorically, which was unacceptable. It was violence and xenophobia in a non-authorized march. The attitude of our government was to staunchly condemn this, but migration is not always a result of ideological and political reasons, and so we should collectively deal with the responsibility for this. In this juncture, I ask the candidates, how do you think that the inter-American system can be pressured in view of political issues and a pandemic that has created social, health, and economic destruction? Thank you very much. Thank you. And I give the floor at this time to the permanent representative of the plurinational state of Bolivia, Hector Arce. Hector, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Chair. Greetings to you and to the Assistant Secretary General, and I'd like to congratulate each and every one of the candidates for their brilliant remarks that we heard earlier. Once again, as I said last week, I want to underscore the importance and how consequential this decision is to all member states that is, and this Inter-American human rights protection system, if there's any achievement we can underscore of the Inter-American system, is the creation of our human rights protection system and how strong it is and how outstanding it is. I hail and commend everyone for the criteria that have been put forward today, because the fact that this year, at this November General Assembly, we're going to have the highest level candidates, the most qualified, and the extra thing is that we have a high number of women candidates, and so we're very happy. So there's total equality between men and women in all these positions. And so after saying this, I have 3 questions, Chair, for each and every one of our candidates. The first question has to do with what I mentioned in the earlier meeting to the candidates of the Commission, and this is for the candidates of the court. What can we do so that international justice, which is subsidiary, can be prompt, more prompt? How can we step up the speed, make it more swifter with regard to cases before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, with the admissibility and merits reports? How can we make them be issued quicker, and the whole process in general with petitions and other cases that come before the Inter-American Court are more expeditiously processed? The second question has to do with a fundamental initiative of the founding members of the Inter-American system who signed the Pact of San Jose, creating the American Convention of Human Rights. We have to be very applied with regard to the criteria of the Inter-American courts in our domestic decisions. We've worked in this regard, but there hasn't been enough progress in Bolivia. We've done a lot to enforce the convention. We've promoted that the prosecutors and judges always apply the criteria that are laid out by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, but it's not sufficient, the work. In other countries it isn't either. So I'd like to ask the candidates, how can we get the opinions, judgments of the court to be used in all the countries? And a third question I have, Chair, how do you view the principle of subsidiarity vis-a-vis? It's said that supposedly after domestic remedies are exhausted, that's when cases can come in. But without exhausting the domestic remedies, people can suffer gross human rights violations, and this situation shouldn't arise, and because the system should protect people from this. So in our criteria, we believe that there should be subsidiarity to the system and in procedure as well. What do you all think about this question? Thank you very much. Thank you, very kind, Hector, for your remarks. Lastly, we give the floor to the alternate representative for Ana Gabriela Vasquez. Ana Gabriel, go ahead. Thank you very much, Chair. At the same time, I thank the candidates for their invaluable presentations. The delegation of Peru would like to take advantage of this opportunity to underscore Cesar Landarroyo's candidacy as a candidate for the Inter-American Court for the term 2022 to 2027. Peru's honored to nominate him in the bicentennial year. It's bicentennial year, and this will help to strengthen regional mechanisms and independent experts as well. Excuse me. Go right ahead. Excuse me for the interruption. Thank you, Chair. Dr. Landa is an exceptional jurist who knows domestic and international law very well, and his prestige is based on his competence in academic practice, which has been endorsed by more than 30 years in academia and in specializing in human rights and constitutional law, as well as his experiences as a upright judge and constitutional judge in service of democracy and fundamental rights, and has dealt with very consequential cases in defense of human rights. We consider the principles and values in his professional career of Dr. Landa. This make him perfect for the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and to contribute effectively with his invaluable ability. So we'd like to ask two questions to the candidates. The first question, with regard to implementation of the principles of subsidiarity and complementarity, with regard to economic, social, and cultural and environmental rights, what is your view with regard to the dialogue that should be take place between national courts and the Inter-American Court to ensure the protection of human rights? Second question, what do you consider is the contribution of the Inter-American Court to strengthen democracy? Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to Ana Gabriela. And with that, we conclude the questions and comments of the distinguished delegations. So now let us move on to item 4, which is the responses and concluding comments of the candidates. So allow me to remind you that we have limited time. We only 7 minutes per candidate. So please keep to the time in answering these very important questions that have been posed to you by those who have had the opportunity to ask them. We offer the floor now to the candidates. The first candidate will be the Brazilian one, Rodrigo Bittencourt Mudrovich. Mr. Bittencourt Mudrovich, you are recognized at this time. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank all of the representatives for the questions that were posed to the candidates. I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity to congratulate the candidates for their presentations and reiterate that I am honored to take part in such an important event. Not only we could get to know such great profiles of these, but also I believe this is important for the court to continue to be strengthened more and more and playing its proper role. Now, with regard to the questions, so to be able to, there's not enough time to answer all of them, but with regard to the priorities of the court and the questions with regard to the opinion about subsidiarity and the strengthening of constitutional convention enforcement of the convention, as well as question with regard to the use of technology and also how to deal with the challenges of the pandemic. First, I'd like to start by answering some of the questions about the priorities of the court. The main priority of the court, as I said in my comments, is to bring the court closer, not only to the states, which it's traditionally done, but bring it to the whole system closer to the people in the countries. In a quest for a dialogue, closer dialogue between the commission and the court, I believe the court has to get closer to the states and engage closer to states and bring the system closer to the states. More than 200 million inhabitants in my country that has its own reality, its own particular characteristics, and so it has to be known by the court. It's very important for the court to be able to, in knowing better the reality, to do its role in a more proper way. So with regard to subsidiarity, I'd also like to make it very clear my position that the Inter-American Court of Human Rights has a subsidiary function in vis-a-vis the states. The states are mainly responsible to ensure full respect for human rights in their territory. And this principle has been materialized in dealing with their own, domestically with their own cases. And this does not mean, I'm not trying to minimize or downplay the role of the court, but what this means is that a lot of what the court does is to engage in dialogue, as often its decisions are binding in the states, but many of the representatives have said that the court should not become a fourth instance tribunal. And in addition to that, we can take advantage of the lessons of the pandemic, some of them with regard to use of the technology, and to make it more accessible and more present, not only in the dynamics in the budget of the country, but in all areas. The technology has allowed us not to only increase the dynamics and the capacity of the court to do its job over these years, and to provide a swift response to questions, but also it's been a fine period to issue judgments, etc. But if we notice, over the last few months, there was an increase of the number of people who were able to take part in the hearings at the court. So the court has become more present, and so this is a fine alternative. And so the court should seek to hold its hearings outside of the court. It should draw all the different people and countries in. There should be a plurality of political system. It should respect and welcome not only countries, but essentially also the most vulnerable segments of populations as well, the most weak, etc. And this should be a major priority of the court post-pandemic. Okay, with regard to the questions relating to the budget of the court, I would like to say that the role of the court to be accountable in detail and with a lot of transparency in its expenditures is very important. And how can it be more independent? There has to be greater devotion of the judges have to be able to be devoted only to the work of the court and not to other things. And so I thank you for this opportunity that you provided me to talk with many people during my campaign, always available to clarify things. I think I've made it clear today and in the past what my positions are, what my pragmatic positions are as to how to make the court more and more of a pillar of the defense of human rights, and a pillar to welcome and transform the most vulnerable and the poorest. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. And we will now give the floor to Miriam Josefina Peña Candia from Paraguay. I wanted to refer to two issues the delegates referred to, which I think are very important because they are directly involved or related to the effectiveness of the court, the compliance with judgments, and the need for prompter justice. And this has to do with the right to access to justice. This right means that we're not just talking about using the system and getting a judgment, but also this has to do with compliance of those judgments. Just if we have compliance with judgments, then we can protect the fundamental right of access to justice. Currently, in the Inter-American system, it is the court that supervises the compliance of judgments. This based on a legal approach. And if after a long and specific proceeding, many times states do not comply with judgments, and to resolve this, the court issues a report on non-compliance, and then it provides it to the General Assembly. This formal communication may not have an impact, however, on the state that is not complying. With regard to compliance with judgments is not effective enough. And so I believe that we need to have a greater political perspective involved, and that there should be a political body that is charged with compliance of judgments. For example, this could be the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs or the Permanent Council itself. This mechanism that I've suggested would also mean that we could help to resolve the backlog of the court, and this would help the system be more effective. In short, delegating supervision of compliance of judgments to a political body would mean that there would be a greater degree of compliance and also a decrease in the case backlog. And speaking of case backlog, and this has to do with one of the questions about prompter justice, I urge that there be more intense use of friendly settlements of cases that are in the inter-American system. And not just the friendly settlements of the Commission, but also I urge that this type of settlement be used by the court, taking into account that friendly settlements are a more prompt way to resolve disputes. The discharging of duties of the court, decreasing case backlog, and using friendly settlements would contribute to an increased effectiveness of the human rights system. Thank you. Thank you very much. You have 7 minutes, and I want to give the floor to Cesar Landa Arroyo. You have the floor. Thank you, ambassadors, for your questions. I would also like to congratulate my colleagues who are candidates. I've learned a lot from you this morning. I wanted to address the questions posed, questions about the merits, fundamental rights, questions about conventional procedures, and also questions about management. I was listening closely to the questions from the different ambassadors about the priorities of the work of the court. And I believe the fact that the court is involved with our citizens and our nations, this means that the court needs to deepen its development of right to health, which has to do with education and work, which are interdependent, of course, on political and civil rights. And this is work that also demands that from a substantive perspective, we need to look at the laws that are based on the convention. and this depends on the cases brought and the vulnerable groups that exist. Panama asked about this. They asked about the inequality of the impact on protection of rights. There are situations that demand different approaches. For example, when we're talking about structural discrimination or intersectionality, and this means we need to have a gender approach used more frequently and try to assess procedural matters such as dynamic proof and presentation of proofs, which would allow for greater protection of victims. I would also highlight the question from the representative of Peru, because the ESCE rights are crucial to improving standards of rights. But there are no rights without democracy. And this is substantive, and the court has been looking at this both at the level of political participation and the value of democracy in the exercise of civil and social rights. This is an important issue, and we need to delve into this further. Another substantive issue was brought up by Mexico. It has to do with case law and jurisprudence. I think it is important to state that there are judgments that define res judicata, and then there are those that are res interpretata, interpretation. So in a judgment, a right might be interpreted, and this might be binding for a state, but in some cases, states have used these interpretation for the purpose of improving their national laws. And so advisory opinions of this nature, in some cases, there are degrees of intensity with regard to the binding nature of the judgments of interpretation, because finally, the work of opinions and decisions of the court have to do with establishing a dialogue. And in this dialogue, member states and their courts need to prioritize issues, such as, for example, issues that have to do with the pandemic or others. Now, I wanted to address the procedural issues. How can we strengthen the situation? I think that the quantitative issue, the fact that there are so many cases that have an impact on the Commission and the court, demands a report. For example, thinking about the proceedings that exist, we should be able to identify what the bottlenecks are. And that would mean we need to identify reforms to improve the system. Now, with regard to compliance with judgments, we also need to have closer engagement with the states. The states need to be involved. We need greater engagement with the Caribbean nations, and we need to have open dialogue with these nations. Now, with regard to case management or management, well, we need transparency, accountability. This is important. And to this end, the budget is the financial expression of a work plan that has different scopes. We need qualitative and quantitative indicators in this sense. And I think that we need to implement management improvement measures, because all of this will allow for better service of high quality justice. And this will have a positive impact on citizens, nations, and vulnerable groups. I thank all of the delegates for their questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Landa Arroyo. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Veronica Gomez of Argentina. You have 7 minutes, madam. Excuse me. There was some confusion about the order. No, excuse me. Actually, now we have the candidate Nancy Hernandez Lopez from Costa Rica. You have the floor. Please ask for the floor, Ms. Lopez. I'm sorry for the technical glitch. First of all, I thank all of my colleagues who are candidates for their presentations, and I appreciate all of the questions from the representatives. I see that there are some common denominators, for example, in strengthening the court and fundamental rights. Again, I'd like to begin with what is the most important challenge that the court is facing. Well, at these times of crisis with regard to the rule of law and questioning of democratic societies, I think the most important thing is to work on the reliability of the system, because without that, we will not have more universalization of the system, and we will not have greater compliance with the judgments and case law of the court. In addition, I believe that we are facing a critical stage, the most critical of the last 40 years. The issue of climate change means that we face new challenges, such as, will life on this planet survive? We're going to face massive migration because of this phenomena. It's going to impact our economies and probably deterioration of the rule of law if this trend continues. Now, our region is characterized by resilient peoples, and I believe that's not going to change. This is a region that historically has had to stand up again and again to face challenges. And our peoples show this spirit. In these times of difficulties, recently looking at our presentations at the UN in New York, for example, President Alvarado said, we are all in this together, or we will all fall. And I think this is the spirit of the United Nations and our system to protect human rights. The region has a historical commitment to human rights and is aware that human development is based on respect for human integrity and respect for justice. I think that we see that we need to all work together, government, civil society, and judges. Frankly speaking, among these dramatic challenges that we are all going to have to face in each of our respective sectors, I have hope. I am not fearful. I see the commitment of the states to the system, and I could tell you the only thing that I fear is a world that does not respect human dignity and does not respect fundamental rights, a world without liberty or solidarity or social peace. That could actually be much worse than any pandemic. There is a series of questions that were posed, and I can't answer all of these questions, I am actually a sitting judge, so I have difficulties in answering some of these questions. As a matter of fact, I cannot answer some of these questions because of that. But I would want to address the principle of non-discrimination as an important principle of human rights, and I want to reiterate my full commitment to strengthening the dialogue and engagement between the Commission, the court, states, and victims so we can seek joint solutions. Now, with regard to compliance of judgments, which is in the interest of everyone, Costa Rica has participated in different visits, commission and court, and I am in favor, as I said, that we should have not just a administration of justice that comes from an office, rather one that is more active and where judges are present. We need to get out of the court and create joint actions between the Commission and the court in each one of the countries. This can lead to dialogue, and this will allow for better compliance with judgments. We have seen that this has given positive results. For example, in a controversial issue, we were able to address this in this way, and so it was very constructive to be able to comply with the judgment. Now, with regard to prompter justice, I believe that, yes, we need a joint planning between the Commission and the court, but always respecting the independence of each of these bodies. Now, I think that the court has a great deal of experience in providing advisory opinions. We've seen this in different cases, and the court has been very good about applying these opinions to the specificities of each case that has come before it. Now, with regard to using technology, I think we need to strengthen the efforts of the court, but we need to have an electronic case management system. This would give more access to states in real time. Due to the time restrictions, I cannot address the other questions, but I would be glad to have bilateral conversations with any delegation that would like to meet with me to answer their questions. Thank you very much to Ms. Nancy Hernandez. Now, yes, we would like to give the floor to Ms. Veronica Gomez, the candidate from Argentina. Thank you very much, Chair. And I thank the member states for all of these questions, which are so very relevant to this process. And I see that you know the human rights system very, very well. I'd like to quickly divide these into procedural matters, technological matters, then some other specific substantive issues, universalization, which I will speak to in English, and also the relationship between the Commission and Court, among others. To begin quickly, Colombia posed an important issue which has to do with financing outside of the regular fund. We know that strides have been made in recent years, practically doubling the budget of the Commission and of the Inter-American Court. The member states know that this is something that is frequent. This has occurred at the UN. In other words, sometimes the treaty bodies not only need regular funds, but they also receive funds from international cooperation to be able to promote human rights and some other strengthening tasks. It is true. There are hazards there, for example, hazards that this could condition the agenda. But if this is well managed, based on a secretariat that understands the impartiality and independence of the body, and the standards and rules of procedures are complied with, these resources are compatible with the goals of the court. The big issue, if we refer to procedural issues and substantive issues, which I don't think that we can address here, Ecuador, Paraguay, Mexico, Guatemala, Bolivia, Peru, and others have asked about issues of domestic or exhaustion of domestic remedies, the court as a fourth instance, the issue of conventional control. These are not in order. Also, criticisms of the court, again, as a fourth instance, virtual proceedings, challenges with regard to compliance. That was a question of Bolivia, subsidiarity versus immediate action. These are the daily challenges faced by those that interpret international law, specifically international courts and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights as the body that interprets the American Convention. Now we're talking about due process in international proceedings. And so it is very important that member states undertake or have a solid proceeding to select judges to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. A lot of ink has been spilled in writing about these matters, specifically with regard to the Inter-American Court, the engagement with states and civil society. I think managing all of these issues in a transparent and fair way demands that the court has very solid judges. I wanted to refer to the engagement between the court and the commission because it has to do with these other issues. I, in past years, have been through and participated in these dialogues between these two bodies. This, with regard to well, it has to do with judicial certainty for victims and states, victims that are using the Inter-American system. And I fervently believe in this. And I see that the Commission and the court, without reforming the American Convention, have resolved many problems for all parties involved by applying statutes and through improvement of rules and procedures of each body. And I believe that this is the path. And I want to be able to guarantee transparency and due process in this manner. Finally, I wanted to talk about the universalization of the Inter-American Court.
Important issue at the level of the Inter-American system. At the moment, we don't have in the composition judges from the Caribbean. In the past, there have been wonderful judges from countries from the English-speaking Caribbean. Now it's really encouraging to see a candidate from Suriname in this election. I really salute that nomination. And as Suriname indicated, it's very important that all legal systems are represented. But if we cannot have all legal systems represented in our 7-member Inter-American Court of Human Rights, at least we need judges in the court that understand the different legal systems and the impact of the decisions of the Inter-American Court in all these different jurisdictions that live together in our Organization of the American States, with its many member states, so that the court can have an impact on all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Veronica Gomez, for your remarks. Now I give the floor to the candidate of Chile, Ms. Patricia Perez Goldberg. Go ahead, Ms. Goldberg. Ms. Perez Goldberg. Ms. Perez, could you please turn your camera and microphone on? There we go. Excuse me. I apologize. It was the mouse click issue. I thank all the ambassadors for their interesting questions. No question. I'll try to be systematic about answering the questions. Firstly, with regard to the protection of the most vulnerable, and I'd like to talk about the universal acceptance of the system, and then the procedural black line, and then the contribution that I can make to legitimization and strengthening of democracy by the court. So with regard to the protecting the most vulnerable in the context of climate change that we're experiencing, and particularly the pandemic as well, and democratic instability throughout the world in general, it's going to be a major challenge to protect the most vulnerable groups in society, not only in our region, but throughout the world. The most vulnerable, including indigenous peoples, girls, and women, and the persons deprived of liberty. Often, many different factors are involved, and we have to talk about intersectional discrimination, which has a important bearing on this. So specific measures should be taken to be able to protect as best as possible the rights of these segments of the population. So I want to particularly mention migrants, because when it comes to migration, which is a fact of life and throughout the world, in view of all the things we're up against right now, and with regard to policies of states, but we have to remember that international human rights law should be taken into account in formulating policies. And access to justice and due process is of the utmost importance to migrants, and also as care has been taken with regard to children, migrants. And so I'd also want to talk about universal acceptance of the convention. Remember, the court, through its judgment, it establishes standards, and hence the importance of engaging in dialogue with all states through its judgments with the national courts, civil society, and citizens. And so I believe that the dissemination of it should be supported of its, but perhaps there should be greater translation, greater dissemination of judgments, but also other advisory opinions, and use of technology has been helpful for judges training, etc. And there's been all sorts of activities for dissemination using tools that are available to it. I believe a leading role has been taken in this regard. I believe in the point of view of universalization, I believe there's the weightiest thing is our advisory opinions. There's been 5 issued over the last year, and these are of the very consequential to both to the Commission as well as to the states to know the thinking and the standards set by the court. And also another question by the ambassadors, I believe, with regard to the competence of the court and the Commission, there has to be more coordination and joint efforts made for it to work smoothly. The processing time has been reduced quite a bit. However, there's more to do. But when justice is slow, it harms the victims mostly, because victims see how slow a settlement of their case is in the making. And when things happen so long a time ago, it makes it very complex to continue processing properly. And so conditions have to be right or put into place to be able to promote friendly settlements to reduce these times. And perhaps technology could be used to hold more hearings during the special and regular sessions of the court. And lastly, with regard to the contribution I could make to the court, that the court can make to democracy in the region, I believe that this is a major contribution of the court, and that would be to providing legitimacy to the people and institutions that are in power in the governments. This is a fundamental role played by the court. You have to remember, courts must always be impartial. And so in this regard, we believe that it's a right. And the judges have to be a third party that are outside of a dispute and cannot be represented in any particular issues. This is all laid out, and this is all precedent and laid out. So that's really all I have time to say. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very kind, Ms. Perez Goldberg. And lastly, we give the floor to the Surinamese candidate, Maitri Vidya Kuldeep Singh. You have the floor, Ms. Kuldeep Singh.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the floor again. The first thing I want to address is compliance with decisions from the Inter-American Court. We are well aware of the fact that there are different legal systems in the Inter-American system. And I'm talking especially about the system in the Caribbean community. My country has a Dutch civil legal system, and it's not very difficult for us to comply with decisions in the Inter-American system. On the contrary, the other common law countries in the Caribbean community have a dualistic system, and therefore requires to implement the articles from the Inter-American Convention into their domestic laws in order to be fully effective. So in order to comply with decisions from the Inter-American Court, it's also very important to involve the legislation from those countries to implement the articles from the convention into the domestic legal system. A second thing is that we're also aware of the fact that the state cannot handle decisions from the Inter-American Court single-handedly. I say this because if you look at decisions from the Inter-American Courts, for example, when the court decides to prosecute violations of human rights, then other state actors like the public prosecutors and the domestic courts are also involved in the execution of the verdict. Therefore, it is important to recognize that the different state actors beyond the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should be involved in the compliance. One of the example, another thing is how would the state, for example, comply with the decisions of the Inter-American Court. And an interesting model to which I'm referring to is the interinstitutional commission that Paraguay created to comply with decisions handed down by the Commission and the Inter-American Court. And said commission is made up of the ministries of the Interior and several other ministries, also the Attorney General of the Republic and the Secretary General of the Presidency of the Republic. As an advisory board, it is made up of 16 state entities, and in a guest capacity, a representative of the petitioner who appeared before the system. The second thing I want to address, and this was a question from Mexico, is the concern for further, especially address the situation of the LGBT groups. The Inter-American Court has brought this topic also under its consideration, and it has the attention from the Inter-American Court. The court, for example, has recognized the importance of LGBT groups who have historically been victims of structural discrimination, stigmatization, diverse forms of violence, and violation of their fundamental rights. And it states that the forms of discrimination that the LGBT group people manifest in the public and private spheres, and that the situation of psychical and psychological violence that they face are one of the most extreme forms of discrimination. And furthermore, it found that these constitute forms of gender violence driven by the desire to punish those thought to challenge gender norms. However, the discrimination is also notorious in other areas, such as the limitations on accessing property rights, and there were also various decisions from the Inter-American Court on this topic. The third thing I want to address are the challenges in the Inter-American system, the pressing challenges, and how this can be modified or strengthened. I'm referring, for example, to the new rules of the Inter-American Court. The new rules from the Inter-American Court, they partially and inconsistently adopt certain proposals outlined. On one hand, for example, they establish that the Commission is no longer required to present a complaint. It is only required to file its Article 50 report. The new rules also do not require the Commission to represent victims who do not have a legal representative. And the new rules created the Inter-American Public Defender to assist victims who lack legal representation to appear before the court. They also limit the Commission's ability to present and interrogate witnesses, since it can only question experts about prior authorization from the court and only if it is relevant to the Inter-American public order. They reaffirm the role of the Commission as a body of the system rather than as a litigant. Article 51 of the new rules establishes that the oral hearing will be opened by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and it will also conclude with the Commission's presentation. There are some shortcomings in the new rules. They still maintain certain aspects of the Commission in its role as an active litigant and closer to the victims rather than as an impartial entity. They require that the Inter-American Commission give the names, for example, the addresses, the telephone number, the email address, and fax number of the representatives of the alleged victims when it is not necessary in the Commission's process to present due and formal accreditation. Neither is it the Commission's responsibility to obtain this information. They also, yes, I'm over time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Candidate Kuldeep Singh. We've concluded the presentations, and so I must give my blessing to each and every candidate to these important positions of members of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. I wish each and every one of you could have been chosen, because the Inter-American Human Rights Protection System has benefited from your interesting comments and the positions you'd laid out. Everything means that we're going down the right road. We're on the right path. So it is the job of the General Assembly of the 51st regular session in November to make the proper decision in selecting the 4 new members. And we will continue in this process to make our institutions even more prestigious than what they are. I'd like to thank the permanent acting and alternate representatives and everyone who has attended this meeting, who has been following us through the different digital platforms. Before wrapping up this meeting and adjourning for good, I want to mention that tomorrow we have an extraordinary event which will begin at 10 a.m. with the important Pan-American Health Organization competitive contest. We have 4 people, a prime minister, a foreign minister, several ministers and vice ministers of health, and the director of the World Health Organization, and Dr. Anthony Fauci, the famous epidemiologist in the world, will be meeting the ideas for the member states to come up with new options to improve our capacity as an organization in the face of this horrible scourge of COVID-19. So I will see you tomorrow, and I reiterate my gratitude. This meeting is hereby adjourned.